Okay, so this is the Bible study for Matthew chapter 8, verses 1 through 13. And the text for today says, When Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. I am willing, he said, be clean. Immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. Then Jesus said to him, See that you don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them. Then Jesus When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. Lord, he said, my servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly. Jesus said to him, Shall I come and heal him? The centurion replied, Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. I tell this one, Go, and he goes, and that one, Come, and he comes. I say to my servant, Do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed and said to those following him, Truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west, and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then Jesus said to the centurion, Go, let it be done just as you believed it would. And his servant was healed at that moment. All right. So remember that you can download PDF copies of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along with us as we study this text. Number 1 says, what did we talk about in last week's Bible study? A, Jesus talked about the wise and the foolish builders, yes. B, Jesus said that our house will stand the storms that come against it if it is built on a solid foundation. Yes, that was the point of the parable. C, Jesus said that doing what Jesus said gives our life a solid foundation. So that's the foundation in the metaphor. And then D, people were amazed because he taught as one who had authority. And I want to just pause on that for a moment because I think that's the piece of last week's study that sort of comes back around in this week's text. So, of course, he's recognizing faith, he's performing miracles. But when we get to the centurion, he recognized authority. And so that was something that figured into the conversation with Jesus, I think. Number 2, what is happening in 8:1 through 3? A, Jesus came down from the mountainside, so this marks the end of the Sermon on the Mount. So yeah, chapters 5 through 7 are, we refer to them as the Sermon on the Mount. He is now coming down from the mountainside, so this sort of 3 chapters of just sitting and teaching the disciples that gathered around him is ending. So now he's going and sort of walking. Now he's obviously teaching throughout his ministry, but now he's walking in the ministry and teaching as he goes. And so that context is significant. B, large crowds followed Jesus, so that continued to happen. C, a man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And that happened. D, Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man and said, I am willing, be clean. Um, and then E, the man was cleansed of his leprosy. Now this sort of contrasts from another place where somebody says, if you can. They say here, if you are willing, I know you can. And maybe that's a distinction that we should better understand in our lives. Like when things aren't happening that we've been asking God for, the problem we always assume is whether God is real, whether God can do the things that he says he can do, but recognizing that God can do things, but not all things are best for us. And so it's not always his will. And that's something that I know that we've talked about because of the scripture that says if you pray anything according to his will, it will be done. And so we talk about that. But I think part of walking with Christ is really beginning to understand his will, beginning to understand what he is about in this world, what really matters to him. And honestly, getting to the place where what matters to him matters to us, because once what matters to him matters to us, um, then we can be a little more confident that what we're asking for is his will, because what matters to him matters to us. So that's our will. Um, so I think that's significant. Number three, what did Jesus say to the man according to 8:4? It says, see that you don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priests and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them. So remember that in Leviticus, in the Old Testament, there are clear directions for skin diseases. And as we read them with a modern perspective, it's really interesting because um, they are. Um, at least in many ways, they connect with our understanding of infectious diseases, and they may not be um, sort of treatment focused, but they're certainly diagnosis focused and quarantine focused, if you will. So somebody with a particular disease, if it looks a certain way, they are supposed to sort of isolate themselves and get away from others so they don't pass it on. And then the way that they are allowed to come back in, the way it is declared healed is not through a doctor or whatever, through some sort of testing. It is because you go before the religious leaders and they check it out and they say, okay, now you're clean and you can come near the people. And so it's very interesting that there is very little separation in Israel in the law between sort of social law and religious law. So Israel, from its start, was was um, a God kingdom. God is the leader, and everything that is law. I mean, most of the law had religious reasons for it, um, and so right and wrong was sort of, um, you know, a religious experience or a spiritual experience, but then was mandated by the social law as well because they were one and the same. And so, really trying to understand that, we need to understand then that there are many things that were in the religious law that were for the good of the people, and the things that we might not call sin, for instance, or unclean, but we would not equate it or associate it with spirituality at all. We would associate it with, this person needs to get to a doctor, this person needs to take reasonable precautions to keep other people from getting sick, and all of that might be reasonable for the government to impose. Maybe we don't think so after what we've been through. I don't know. Everybody has a different take on that. Um, but in the law, in Israelite law, it was one and the same. So we struggle a little bit with this, I think, now because the dietary restrictions and certain things like this as skin diseases. We recognize in many cases that these were the part of the law that was intended to protect people, keep people safe. It was social standards, but our treatments are better today. So perhaps, and our the way we keep meat or the way we prepare meat is safer today. So perhaps keeping these laws is no longer necessary. And when we talk about that, I think sometimes we have a little bit of trouble separating. Um, and because people are like, well, if you're going to eat pork and you're not going to observe this law, then we might as well we get to pick and choose which laws we observe, and then they do away with other ones as well that are not intended to be done away with. Cooper. Cooper. It's a new experience having a dog in the house, which is what amounts to the studio here where I'm recording this Bible study. So I we had an outbreak when my wife came home an hour early last week. And apparently somebody is walking by, probably walking their dog right now. So anyway, we have a dog, at least for now. So, number 4 says, why did Jesus say this? A, I don't know. B, he already had crowds following him. What would happen if everybody knew he could do this? C, it was not yet time. D, certain things set in motion his crucifixion. Although this was his ultimate purpose, there were things he needed to teach his disciples before that time came. So I'll just say from the start that I left something out, and maybe it's because it's understood or expected, but just in case it's not, we just had this long talk about leprosy and skin diseases and the law, and so I mean one of the reasons may have been the consideration that people would know that he came in contact with somebody with leprosy, and he may also have to isolate himself for a time until it was sure that he didn't catch it. So that's kind of left out of this. I think probably that. I mean, for some people that may be the main thing. So why are we leaving it out? But I'll just throw it out right there. That may be part of the reason. It may be the whole reason. But what I chose to focus on a little bit more in the answers to this um, is really this concept that as Jesus begins to perform miracles, he is becoming more well known. He already had crowds following him. And the more well known he became and the more crowds followed him, the more angry the religious leaders became, and the more they began to pursue him to death. And so if this guy has to go show himself and be declared clean, and yet in doing so he creates a problem for Jesus. That was not what Jesus was not trying to be on the radar of the religious leaders at this point. And in John 7:4-8 is where his brothers, and I think maybe at some level his brother was sort of ribbing him, was sort of giving him a hard time because of jealousy, perhaps, about him being a public figure and everybody following him. But he says anybody who wants to be a public figure needs to go down to this festival. And obviously, he didn't understand that Jesus wasn't trying to be a public figure in that way. And he said it's not time yet, and there was a little back and forth, but basically he ends up telling his brother, for you any time is good. In other words, because you're trying to reason this out and think through what the best time would be, and you think that you don't understand my motives, and you think that now would be a good time, so for you any time is good. I'm following the Father. I'm obeying God. And for me, any time is not right, but only the time that God sets forth. Um, So I think I wanted to pull that in a little bit. I think definitely the concept of um, the law and leprosy was very important to the reasoning here of him saying, don't tell everybody. Obviously the people around him didn't run away, or at least we don't read that they ran away. So they recognized that this man became clean. So if Jesus has the power to make this man clean, to heal this man, then it doesn't feel like, one, it doesn't feel like he would be at risk because he overpowered the disease, if you will. And two, if anybody else thought they were at risk, the best place to be would be following Jesus, not running away from Jesus, because he's the one that just made that guy clean, just healed that guy. So now, that being said, somebody that wasn't there in front of him may not have had the same response. And so that is definitely part of it. So I would say, in general, those are probably the two main thoughts that come out of the commentaries about why Jesus would say, don't tell anybody. And one has to do with the leprosy and that risk according to the law, and the other has to do with Jesus, the timing of Jesus's revelation to everybody. Number five, what happened in 8, 5, and 6? When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. Lord, he said, my servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly. Um, a centurion came. Now, a centurion would be a Roman soldier. This is not probably a Jew, but it's somebody from the occupying force of that area. So, by the way, not somebody that the Israelites in general would be too fond of, not somebody that the religious people, of course, the teachers of the law had figured out how to coexist and be very political with the ruling authorities. But in general, people probably didn't like this person. He was of a different class, of a different group. Of somebody that is oppressive to the Israelites. But he came to Jesus and said, I'm seeing that you're healing people. I have a servant that is suffering terrible. Would you heal him too? Number 6 says, how does Jesus respond in 8:7? He says, shall I come and heal him? And so, one, if this is a Gentile, Jesus is offering to go to the home of a Gentile. Perhaps not the centurion's home, but this man's home or whatever. He's offering to come into a place that's not approved by the law either. That would be also unclean. Um, so Jesus is offering to do that, but the man declines that for whatever reason. It doesn't tell us that he did that because he knew Jewish law and he knew that would be a problem for Jesus or anything. But it actually has a better reason why he didn't. We don't know his underlying reasons, but we do know what he said. So number 7 says, how did the centurion respond according to 8, 8, and 9? A, yeah, that would be great. No, he didn't say that. Although I imagine it would have been great for him and that would be fine, but he says, B, Lord, I do not deserve to have you under my roof. So I'm not worthy of you coming to visit me. C, just say the word and my servant will be healed. And D, I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. Authority brings results. That's a paraphrase. What you say will be done. So he says, I have authority. When I say something, people do it. I'm under authority. So when somebody else says something, I do it. I understand authority, and you clearly have authority. This goes back to last week where they said, this guy teaches with authority, not like our teachers of the law. So there was something about Jesus where he commanded nature, he commanded diseases, he commanded the audience when he was teaching. There was something special about what he had within him. And the centurion recognized it, and he said, "I understand how authority works. You don't even need to come. You just say it, and whoever does things for you will do it." And obviously, that's the presence of God, the Spirit of God, um, not some person that Jesus commanded, but um, for that matter, if there be disease that was causing the paralyzation, Jesus apparently had authority to command that as well. Um, Number 8, how did Jesus respond according to 8:10 through 12? A, he was amazed and told everyone. So he's having this conversation with the one guy. There's a bunch of people around. We don't know how quiet they were paying attention to the conversation or if they were talking amongst themselves. This probably happened a lot. It's hard to tell what might have happened. But he turns around to all the people following him and he says, "I've not seen faith like this in anyone in Israel." So most of these people were probably Israelites, although not all. And he turns around and talks to them and says, "I've been around Israel. I've not seen somebody who believes that I have the authority to command something and it gets done." And this guy does. So this was kind of a jab at the religious people, and it points out that the Gentile had more faith in what God could do than the people who were supposed to be God's people. And by the way, I think that can be true also today. Now, obviously, there are people that are not a part of the church, not a part of the people of God, that don't believe in God at all. Um, but I do believe that there are a lot of people that are not a part of the church, the group that's supposed to be God's people, more because of the failure of God's people and who God's people have been. And they actually do believe in God. They believe in God in some ways more than God's people do. And I think that should be humbling for us as God's people, where we have a tendency to be a little arrogant, like we have something nobody else has, and we need to declare it to them and give it to them. We might find out that they have better faith than us. In fact, I find out that new believers that do come to accept Christ and He delivers them out of a big mess often have more faith as a young believer in what God can do than the supposedly mature believers in the church, and often do the things that God tells them to do because they trust in Him. So we have people that are brand new believers that show up at church on Wednesday night and look around and they're like, "I don't understand why, like, I feel like I'm supposed to be here. You guys have told me it's good for me to be here, but I look around and there's a lot of people that are supposedly more mature Christians that don't come and they don't mm, feel like this is important to their faith, or maybe they don't feel like I'm important enough for them to come to minister to me." Um, as that new believer, there's a lot of feelings that happen when they dive in deep into the kingdom of God, when they come in and volunteer and they start doing things that they know God is calling them to do, and the supposedly more mature believers are not there. I'm not saying that you're a sinner if you don't volunteer at this or that, or you're a sinner if you don't come to church on this day or that day. But I'm just saying that in our church, we have a dynamic where we have young believers that come in and are growing fast and they want as much of God as possible. And they come in contact with supposedly mature believers that feel like they have already enough of God and they don't need any more. And that is a bizarre feeling to them. And so I often see more faith in the young believers. I often see them doing what God has called them to do more consistently than the supposedly more mature believers. And so I think that's actually part of the value of our church. Part of the reason I love serving in our church, because we have so many younger believers, that we have developed a church culture where people do things in our church that in other churches are not done, because people don't want to do them. They don't have time for it or whatever. They've got other priorities, and so they're not diving in. And people from other pastors sometimes can't figure out how we get people to do this and do that and do all these things that Jesus called us to do. And I'm like, because they haven't been in the church for so long that they got jaded somehow and decided those weren't important things. And so they still think they're important things when I read the Bible and tell them that this is what the Bible says. These are important things. Um, they haven't drawn lines on how far they're willing to go, like the people that have been in the church for much longer in many cases. And so I think our church gets more done in the kingdom in terms of seeing other people come to Christ, because we have so many young believers that don't know that the church doesn't do that anymore. And they haven't been. So I really worry about, honestly, anybody that moves from to another community and joins a church, even a Nazarene church. I worry about sending our kids off to college where they can pick up the complacency of the church as a whole, and lose the urgency of seeing God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven that I feel like we have in our church. I'm going to keep going, but I think um, I'm not surprised at all that Jesus found somebody with more faith outside of the people that are supposed to be the people of God than he had found ever within. B, he notes that people like this will be at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, while the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside. And I firmly believe this. I believe, like he said already, not everybody who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom. I believe that there will be people that have been attending church for years that think they're good, and they die and they go to the judgment seat, and they find out that they're the ones to be thrown outside while people from the outside are being included. Why? Because of their faith and their response to the words of Jesus. See, Jesus said, Let it be done just as you believed it would. And the servant was healed at that moment. So Jesus said, Let it be done according to your faith. In other words, if somehow deep inside he didn't really think it could be done, I think that's what would have been done. What he believed could or couldn't be done. And honestly, I think that's what happens in our life is what we believe can be done gets done, and what we believe can't be done doesn't get done. Because I sometimes believe that God does things according to our faith, and our faith is not strong. And so we um, dumb down what God can do in our lives, because we don't believe He can do much. And those young believers, those folks coming in from the outside, believe that God can do amazing things because they've seen it in their life. Number 9 says, What kind of faith does Jesus find in us? And that's the real examination question. You can interpret the things that I've said as criticisms of the church or of you personally. I don't. I'm looking at a camera. I'm not looking at your face. So I don't know how you could think I'm talking right to you, but people do. Um, but this is a moment to examine ourselves and ask ourselves honestly, what kind of faith would Jesus find in us?